delegates have arrived dressed in their black, gold, and yellow t-shirts, black, gold, and green t-shirts. And we already saw, despite the warnings from the Secretary General, Gwede Mantashe, that no divisive songs will be allowed, but you could see the tension and that proxy battle that everyone is talking about ahead of the December elective conference played out somewhat in songs. We saw earlier when the conference started, the Free State delegates, the Eastern Cape delegates rather, started singing and signaling for change, and we know from that province there is a lot of support from for the Deputy President, Cyril Ramaphosa. But then we saw the opposing side also wanting to be heard and trying to drown them out. We saw the KZN delegates together with the Northwest and even from the MKMVA delegates basically singing songs asking what has President Jacob Zuma done and what are the things that they're looking for him to answer to. So that has been the mood here at the Nasrec Expo Center south of Johannesburg. Of course, the big one was President Jacob Zuma opening the 5th National Policy Conference, and he was basically setting the tone on issues that the deliberations will be about. We know that these 2 days have been dedicated for the organization to reflect, because they are in agreement that the ANC is in crisis, and part of it is to reconnect with the South African public, especially with the 2019 elections just around the corner. With me now is our resident analyst, Mpumelelo Mkhabela, to just get a sense of all of the issues that President Jacob Zuma raised. Mpumelelo, and maybe the perfect place to start is that lackluster response that we got when the delegates were asked to welcome President Jacob Zuma to the podium. It wasn't the usual hype and the loudness, and you could see that only particular delegates were singing.
Yes, it wasn't far from electrifying. It was actually very subdued. You know, people were clapping, some of them almost as if it's a matter of procedure that they have to do so, as a matter of obligation. You didn't feel there was a spontaneity of support that he was actually enjoying. That actually perhaps defines the nature of the conversations that are going to be happening here. There's a lot of palpable tension. You can sense that people want to speak out, they want to say something, but perhaps they're waiting for the right moment. So the opening wasn't really that grand for President Jacob Zuma, and you could actually feel, even as he was speaking, trying to re-emphasize some of the points. I think on 3 or 4 occasions, he actually wanted to repeat, saying, let me repeat, as if people didn't hear, because they didn't respond to what he was saying. He didn't get the feedback that he was looking for.
Even the applause, you know, I think there were moments where he expected it, it didn't come, and hence the repetition and which is quite a new thing for President Jacob Zuma.
It's unusual. I mean, it's for the first time. I might have missed him speaking like this before, but it's for the first time I saw him where he actually asked for permission from the audience to repeat himself, to reread what he had said, because actually there was no response. It's almost as if he felt like they didn't hear him out. And
let's get into that speech. You know, obviously a lot of aspects, we'll try and break it down into the various issues that he spoke to. But one of them was around the issues of the courts. This is where we saw him going off the prepared speech, but basically lashing out against the opposition for continuously taking the ANC to court, but even going further, suggesting that them taking the ANC to court, or the ANC government to court, was making it difficult for them to implement some of the policies that they had promised people.
Yeah, well, it's very unfortunate that he says things like this, because actually he's misleading the delegates, because most of the time when the government had been taken to court, and this has happened since Mandela's time, it happened during Thabo Mbeki's time, it's happening under him. Most of the times people had gone to court, NGOs, social active, many people, they had gone to court to actually seek to ensure that their rights are enforced by the government. Many people will remember the emotional case of the TAC, where they became successful. That was under Mbeki's government, and the government was forced to provide ARVs when in fact it was not the policy of government at the time. Many people will remember stories of access to education, access to health that had gone to court, women's rights being vindicated in court when the government couldn't do so, issues of sexual rights being vindicated in the constitutional court, whereas government had already passed certain laws. So it's been the trend or the philosophy of the constitutional court to be activist and to actually hold government to account is not something new. So he mustn't make it as a new thing. Perhaps the difference in this case is that the challenges that he's facing have less to do with policy,
Yes,
have got to do with his own conduct.
And in terms of following the law, because a lot of the
Yes.
times that is how he gets taken to court. We saw with the Constitutional Court, it was a matter of you have a Chapter 9 institution that has made or recommended what action he needs to take.
Yeah.
And he was saying, I'm not going to do it. You are not the final arbiter to the public protector.
Exactly, that is the thing, because the president who had faced policy challenges in court was, in fact, it was mostly Mbeki's time, where his government was challenged quite a lot. You remember there was a Western Cape case where the government was ordered to provide housing for people that were homeless. The so-called Grootboom case.
Yeah.
That was a direct service delivery case. Even the ARV case of the TRC was a direct policy issue. But even those were not about preventing the government or hindering government from delivering. It was saying to government, hey, you might have thought that it was not your responsibility. Actually, we confirm as a court that it is your responsibility. Please deliver. So the court was more like empowering and enforcing the constitutional rights of people to receive services rather than hindering the services. But in his case, the questions are more about his own conduct. It's about whether or not he acted correctly on Nkandla. As you correctly say, it was about whether or not he respects Chapter 9 institutions. We all know that during that time of Nkandla, he kept on questioning the powers of the public protector. It looks like he has now moved on from that. He's now questioning the powers of the courts. And if judging from experience of what the outcome was with the public protector case, I mean, it's clear even now he's not going to win against the courts.
And we again got his sense of what democracy actually means, because he asked the delegates to think about whether this is how democracy, how they had designed democracy to be, when you have a situation where opposition can lose arguments in parliament and then take you to court to go and challenge it. And it's part of this whole thing we hear from him about the funny democracy. Should we worry about these sentiments? Especially because, you know, we talked about how just last week the ANC Women's League was also talking about reviewing whether the constitutional democracy is working.
That's a very important question. We as ordinary citizens should worry because he is the head of government, and if he takes that posture, he sets the tone for the rest of government to question courts. That's the first part. But we're at an ANC conference here. ANC delegates must be very worried that they have a president who doesn't seem to know where the ANC comes from. Before we came here, I took time to read previous ANC documents. One document that I took particularly interest in was the 1992 document. In May 1992, the ANC had a conference here, policy conference,
yes.
same venue. 2 years before they took over power, 2 years before the 94 elections. In there, that document, there is a guidelines of how the ANC plans to govern if it wins the elections that were still pending. And those guidelines include, among other things, how the courts are going to be structured in the new government of the ANC. And in there's a provision for what is called judicial review, which means that in the event that the executive or the legislature or other state organs take decisions that are not in line with the constitution that was still being drafted at the time, the courts would have the final say of reviewing and being the final arbiter. And to a certain extent, Zuma captured that in his written speech here.
In his written speech, yes.
Only to change later off the cuff, which actually means that the speech was prepared for him by the ANC, whoever is a speech writer in the ANC. So they knew what he has to say. But clearly, he does not believe what he was reading. That's why he went off the cuff to contradict what was prepared for him. That's what I think ANC delegates should really, really be worried about.
And of course, he slightly mentioned the other issue. You know, he has been the one president who has faced 2 motions for him to go within the National Executive Committee. And in that speech, 2 sentences where he says, you know, the power is with you guys, the delegates. One moment, you can hear people that are not branch delegates or branch members talking about President Jacob Zuma must go, and you keep quiet. You don't say anything on this.
Well, it's a strategy to keep on inciting people to defend him. And he keeps on saying, well, the opposition and everyone else can speak because I have the backing of the ANC. So when people don't respond emphatically, he tries to to incite them to respond emphatically that indeed, they still support him.
And
So
it was quite subdued.
it was quite subdued. People didn't want to show off exactly where they stand on that. So it was a continuation of that mood of being subdued. And I think people can feel that their organization is really, really under threat at this
And
at
perhaps
this moment.
a sign that this might be an issue here at this policy conference. But the other issue, going after the stalwarts. I mean, he basically, towards the end there, also of COF, basically saying that the stalwarts are trying to undermine them, the branch delegates, and the stalwarts, of course, have also called for him to step down.
Well, that's another contradiction, because on the one hand, he was calling on the ANC to be united. So you can't say the ANC must be united, but at the same time, you are disparaging of a very critical component of the ANC that hold the party's institutional memory, and that's the veterans. So how do you seek to unite the ANC and exclude those people? So it was, for me, a bit of a contradiction, and he came across as very self-serving. Just because those stalwarts are critical of him, they therefore not part of the unity project that is running. So you are calling for unity, but you are remaining factional. You don't want to rise above these differences that the stalwarts are raising. You don't want to unite them to say, we welcome all these people with different views, including those that criticize us. Come on board, let's debate. No, you are saying that for the sake of the delegates hearing you saying that, but we know in truth you also criticize them. You actually don't like them because they are critical of your leadership, and that's not honest.
Overall, Mpumi, I mean, it rested on him in a way to set the tone for this conference. Do you think he managed to capture the crisis that the ANC is facing and the challenges or the reason why it has not been able to implement some of its own policy discussions?
I don't think the tone of his speech was correct. I don't think one got a sense that he takes responsibility for some of the problems that the ANC has. A very large part of the ANC problems at the moment can be attributed to his failure to lead, either by omission in many instances where he should have acted, he didn't act because it's self-disinterest. In some instances, he should have acted, he acted, but he acted in a wrong way and brought the ANC, quite frankly, into disrepute. So that didn't come through. It came across as a cold speech of somebody who's observing the ANC from outside. Even as he was reading, he was like, he doesn't belong to this ANC. He's speaking about another ANC that should really take care of itself. He's not part of that problem that must be fixed. He's out of it.
I know it's not December yet, but this is his second last national meeting of the ANC that he will be presiding over, because we know that December he has to step down. And I felt, when maybe you can give your views, did he even give a contribution under his government, what the ANC has been able to do?
No, there's been no contribution whatsoever, because it's a policy conference, which also has to do organizational renewal discussions. He should have taken this conference into his confidence to say, since I took over, since my leadership took over, since we were elected in Mangaung, or even he could have even chosen to go back to as far back as Polokwane to say, this is what we've been doing to try to address the challenges of the ANC. He didn't do that. Government-wise, he could have said, in the last few years since we were given the privilege to govern, this is what we have done in terms of policies. These are the challenges that we face. We have not been able to fix the following. Can you help us as delegates? For the first time we're meeting together, it's a national conference, let's find solutions. You didn't get anything. It came across as one of those ordinary speeches that he delivers, punctuated by his traditional giggling, and that he came across as not taking himself seriously. So to a certain extent, it didn't set the right tone.
And maybe to move away from President Jacob Zuma and talk about what is supposed to be happening now. The Secretary General, Gwede Mantashe, is supposed to be giving the diagnostic report, as they call it, where he identifies where are the problems within the ANC. What can we expect from that report?
If the Secretary General is honest, he will reflect on the fact that the ANC is losing electoral power. 2, he will reflect on the fact that the ANC no longer leads public debates. The ANC follows. 3, he will reflect on the fact that there's another ANC that's co-governing. There's another faction that's co-governing with the ANC in government, which is the Guptas. He must reflect on how that has impacted on his way of running the ANC as a CEO at Luthula House. how has that helped him or not helped him to actually issue instructions and get people to toe the party line, whereas there's another group that's running with things on the other side. He will also reflect on the issue of branches being captured by interest other than those of
the vote buying,
the vote buying issue. And more importantly, he will not just make a diagnostic thing. He must give pointers into what are the possible solutions without prescribing to the delegates, because the delegates must still discuss and say this is our way forward. But he must give pointers.
And I mean, should they also not reflect on their own failures as an NEC? I mean, this is given that most of the top six has continued, except with the addition of maybe Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa, from 2007 in Polokwane, we saw a split with COPE. Then we saw another split with the EFF, which have directly challenged their power within, in terms of electoral support. But then also a very fractured COSATU. They also oversaw that with NUMSA being kicked out of COSATU.
If he's honest, he will reflect on their own difficulties as the top six, as the NWC, and broadly as the NEC. And he will reflect on how these structures interact with government. And then he will invite the delegates to say, this is where we see it as the leadership on all of these areas. What do you think? And then the delegates will then, if he's honest enough, the delegates are going to be honest with him. But if he sets a tone of being dishonest, the delegates are more likely to also say, well, these guys are not taking this matter seriously. So the whole conference becomes like nothing about nothing.
We also have to talk about the fact that the alliance partners are here and that relationship is in tatters. SACP, Sanko, COSATU have called for the president to go. COSATU has gone even further, banning the president. What can we expect to be their contribution to that talk?
There's a lot of their members who came here who serve in ANC structures. I expect from their side to have the most robust contributions coming from their side, because we already know their position. So it's not like they'll be hiding. And they've expressed their opinions publicly, because most of them felt like they didn't have an opportunity to speak inside. You know, the Alliance Council had been postponed countless times. And the last time it was postponed by the ANC. So COSATU didn't take kind to that. SSCP didn't take kind to that. And the next engagement they're having with the ANC is here. So there's no way they can suppress the issues they wanted to raise at the Alliance Council. They will raise them here. And
of course, the big one is that after this policy conference, you have the SSCP going to its own elective conference. And one of the heated issues it will have to resolve on is whether they will contest state power. Can we expect what happens here to influence that?
To a certain extent, it might, although it would not be conclusive. But remember, the SSCP is also very opportunistic, because they've been, dangling this whip.
For quite some time.
Yeah, it happened even before Polokwane. They dangled this whip to say, we're going to break, we're going to break, we're going to break. Because there are indeed structures in the SSCP, especially their YCL, the Young Communist League, and some other provincial structures and regions who are pushing hard. They want the SSCP to contest the elections because they think the ANC is on a perpetual decline.
And as we round it off, what was your impression in terms of the balance of forces that we keep talking about? Did you get any sense in terms of the succession debate with Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa and Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma leading that?
We didn't get a full picture here, but we got some hint of what might still to come. Because this is the first of the first 2 days of what is supposed to be the organizational conversations and introspection. So some delegates might not have come to this one, but I think tomorrow and Sunday we will probably have a full house of all the delegates, and that's where we can actually speak with confidence of what the balance of forces look like. What we heard in the morning was just mere hints of what might still to come, without a full reflection of what will actually happen, is what's happening now.
And in your experience, what happens at this, what have been the differences between what comes out of the policy conference and then ends up being adopted at the elective conference?
It's again the question of balance. Whoever is going to be the majority here in terms of policy positions, we will know exactly what is more likely to happen in December at the elective conference. Those who lose the debates here they will know that we have a lot of work to do in between now and December to win the December conference. And those who will win, they'll obviously be very emboldened. They'll go out there and reinforce themselves and try to do a clean sweep come December. So all of these things are basically, the policy discussions can also be proxies.
You're not very positive about them emerging very united, which is the overall tone of what President Jacob Zuma was trying to push for.
It's impossible because the delegates themselves, they do understand that much as he speaks about unity, he too is leading a faction. So he's not the person to unite them. They understand it. That's why you still have the others singing for Cyril and the others doing all of that. You're going to see a lot of that tomorrow and until the end of the conference. So notwithstanding the whole commitment, at least in words, about unity, his conduct himself, lashing out at the veterans, it's an indication that he's actually not ready for unity. He's actually fighting a battle for his life.
Wow. Thank you very much. That was our resident analyst, Mpumelelo Mkhabela, not very confident about the ANC delegates emerging from this policy conference united. Unity is what they're looking for given the crisis that the ANC is in, and very worried about what happens in the 2019 national and general elections. Of course, 2016 was not a good year for the ANC. It was a continuation of electoral support decline from 2009 as far as elections go. And now they know that opposition parties are already working very hard to try and get their chance to govern South Africa. And this is, in essence, is the beginning of that in terms of how will the ANC approach the 2019 elections. But before that, they also need to resolve their own issues. As Mpumelelo was saying there, the divisions are quite deep. It was divisions over whether President Jacob Zuma must stay or go. And now we've got divisions over who should emerge as the winner come the December elective conference. Just to give you a sense of what we're expecting here, the discussions are behind closed doors from now going forward. We're expecting that Secretary General Gwede Mantashe will deliver the diagnostic report, which is his description of the state of the ANC, encapsulating the challenges that the party is facing, and then obviously getting the delegates to discuss that. We'll also have the head of campaigns, Fikile Mbalula, delivering the organizational renewal report, which is supposed to be the basis of how the ANC moves forward and overcomes its challenges. And of course, there's the strategy and tactics report that will be delivered by Nathi Mthethwa. Of course, we are not officially inside the discussion rooms, but obviously we will be talking to those that are inside there so that we can bring you the latest on what is happening. We are also expecting random briefings from ANC officials on what is going on inside. So do stay tuned and following us on Twitter and on Facebook at News24. My name is Mahlatse Gallens, and we will see you tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. for a special edition of Politiki.